Can everybody hear me? Dr. Ray Moranamika, can you hear me? I don't know where the organizers are, so should I wait a bit longer or should I go ahead and start? I mean, I started the meeting, but should I start the presentation or wait? Well, I guess maybe we'll go ahead and start. I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully you can see my screen. If somebody can give me a thumbs up. Okay, great. All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and start. I'm talking tonight about the challenges of housing and placemaking in the 21st century. I am going to go through some of the challenges for housing, and I'm going to go through a couple of examples of good design and planning, one in the United States and one in Qatar. This is a great quote from an American, a futurist. More is not better, better is better. You don't need a bigger house. You need a different floor plan, which is a really nice quote because I'm actually going to talk a little bit about the size of homes. What I'm going to talk about is I'm going to talk about housing as a fundamental building of both architecture and of our settlements. I'm going to talk about housing the world sustainably and how this is a multi-generational challenge for architects, planners, architects, urban designers, and town planners. And I'm also going to talk about that smaller is better, gentle density in walkable neighborhoods. And I'm going to go through a couple of examples of this. Housing as shelter is older than agriculture and urbanization, more than 13,000 years. And housing is the most abundant necessary building type in the world. Now, definitions vary from city to city and region to region, but residential land uses typically account for about 65 to 75% of the building footprint in most cities, depending on the methodology for defining boundaries and metric areas, et cetera, et cetera. And this even happens as urban regions still only account for 3% of the world's total inhabitable land today. And on the right here, you can see the Plan Abu Dhabi 2030 plan. And Abu Dhabi is very typical of cities in this way. Now, at the dawn of the 21st century, vernacular housing accounted for about 90% of the world's buildings, according to Oliver. And this included about 800 million homes. Based on the population growth over the last 24 years, there might be about 1 billion vernacular homes in the world today. This is if the ratio between population and vernacular homes has remained consistent on time. That just means there hasn't been an increase in overcrowding, the number of occupants who are actually occupying the floor area during that time. So this makes the need to understand homes, houses, and housing very evident. Those of us who are in architecture and town planning, we're familiar with this. Of course, urban planners are one of our goals is to promote the general health, welfare, and public safety of citizens. And these numbers from the UN have been around now for about 10 years, that 54% of the world's population lived in urban areas as of 2015. By 2050, 66% of the world's population is projected to live in urban areas, and 90% of that increase in concentration and density and population will occur in Asia and Africa, which geographically speaking, actually the UAE fits within that category. And it's also important to clarify when I'm talking about sustainability, I like to use the most general definition, which basically means maximizing efficiencies while minimizing resources and waste. Now, there are several people, and this is something that's begun really over the last really in the 21st century. Many have been arguing that quality housing is a fundamental human right. This is because the housing is the foundation of other core rights, including health, education, water and sanitation, freedom, association, expression, and the right to life and living with dignity of world. And if housing accounts for 65 to 75% of the building footprint in all cities, then housing is at the heart of the built environment sector in terms of materials, resources, systems, and land use. Most people, the fact of the matter is, most people in the world today still do not treat housing as a right, but as a commodity. This is a thing, a material or product to be bought and sold. But today there are over 1 billion people worldwide who live without a home or they live in grossly inadequate housing, lacking the most basic resources, such as this example you see here to the right in South Africa, which is this is a self-organized settlement. Um, and in almost every city worldwide, it doesn't matter if it's the global north, the global south, it doesn't matter if it's Europe or it is Asia. Housing is unaffordable for most on low and middle incomes, and housing costs are only growing faster than incomes. So this generates a vicious cycle, and it's appropriate I'm showing this image because all the news right now is about Hurricane Milton hitting Florida. Our need to house people requires more construction, especially in settlements. More construction means more use of real and abstract resources, such as materials and financial investments. Bigger cities and resource depletion contribute to more environmental effects, such as greenhouse gas emissions and biodiversity loss. And these impacts tend to lead to climate migration, moving from high hazard areas to less hazardous ones. For here, I put a photograph of the devastation from Hurricane Katrina. The effect of Katrina in New Orleans was actually to lead to housing shortages in Oklahoma City and in San Antonio because a large amount of the population of New Orleans permanently relocated to those cities further away from the coast. So this in turn creates a need for more housing, which only repeats the cycle and worsens the situation even more as we go on. But the fact is, I firmly believe that family, housing, and settlements are really who we are, right? They define who we are as a people. Housing is a uniquely complex problem. It is a fundamental shared infrastructure. It can be a slow moving, durable good, slow moving in terms of sale and resale. It is an industrial output. It is a financial asset. Most people view it as a financial asset, cultural expression, and most importantly, it's a home. It's the place where we live and we raise our families. And it's often housing is all these things simultaneously. So, how we imagine homes, how do we develop our neighborhoods, and how we enact housing policy really reveals what we stand for as a society, who we are, our identities and culture, our histories and geographies, our economies, and our politics, and how we impact the planet. Uh, our habitats create environmental damage through fossil fuel-based heating and cooling and mobility-related emissions. This is exacerbated by poor and regional planning. We saw an example of this with the rainfall in Dubai last spring. On the right here, this is a photograph from Indonesia. This is not a hill. This is just a pile of garbage. This is a landfill. When we adapt our buildings, it produces more material impacts. If we demolish our buildings, the waste tends to go to landfills such as this. According to some authors, construction and demolition waste contributes 30% of the total produced waste of the world today. So again, it's all part of this life cycles cost of housing. But the fact of the matter is we rarely take such costs into consideration in any country in the world, right? Either long-term housing policies of governments at the national, regional, or local level, or in individuals' short-term, day-to-day decision making. Realtors and home builders rarely, if ever, communicate this information in housing prices because they're always interested in getting the sales commission, generating the profit. It's also never priced in for investors, developers, or builders, and the impacts accumulated as individual homes cluster in sprawl configurations worldwide, expanding the forms of settlements. To the right here is Houston, which is one of the most sprawled cities in the United States. And this leads in, so if you believe all that, housing actually impacts either directly or indirectly 16 of the 17 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And to be perfectly honest, if we take into account things like house barges, houseboats, and water villas, it also affects all 17, life below the water, because there is an impact on that as well. This is a nice image. It's about 15 years old, but illustrates a point very clearly from Tim Deschamps at per Square Mile blog. He did this in 2010. If the world's entire population was concentrated at the density of specific cities, and you can see across the top and the bottom that Paris, New York, London, San Francisco, Singapore, these are relatively dense cities. You can actually house the entire world in 2010, covering three to five states of the United States. But if you look at Houston to the lower right, it actually covers almost most of the continental United States. So what this means is we have a challenge, especially for our students, but for our architects, urban designers, and town planners at all levels, from regional metropolitan planning to urban design to housing and architecture, to change the way we have been building, especially in the post-war period. The fact of the matter is, mega projects of architectural fancy are not the answer. They may produce a lot of press in the popular media, and they produce very pretty illustrations, but this is not the way to go about it, such as the Dubai Ziggurat, which I think land was cleared for, but it was never built. And now Saudi Arabia's the Line, which has now been reduced to just 1.25 kilometers in length, based on its after it was originally proposed to be 170 kilometers long. So what is the answer? The answer is basically smaller homes based on need, not want. Compact urban settlements based on what Canadian urban planner Brett Tonerin talks about, gentle density, which is attached ground-oriented housing that is more dense than the detached home, such as you see here in this beautiful photograph of the Museum neighborhood in Philadelphia. Most of these townhomes are, well, they're really 5 stories because they all have basements, but they're basically 4 stories tall. And this goes right along with what architect Leon Carrier has been talking about now for about 20 years, arguing that cities should be universally composed of 5 to 7 stories packed densely together, like Paris and Barcelona, which are the 2 best examples of this. But to do this, it really requires changes in government housing policy, planning and development, and also, perfectly honest, bank lending policies. This type of housing is very difficult to get loans to do, especially in the United States. So this represents nothing less than a radical change in the way that we have built cities in the post-war period since 1945. It means less sprawl, less automobile dependency, and less single-family zoning. There are several governments who have already taken steps to eliminate single-family zoning as a zoning designation. There will always be single-family homes, and they'll always play a role in settlements. But single-family zoning, residential zoning, has a long history of being used as an exclusionary zoning practice where the other is kept out of neighborhoods. It doesn't help promote social diversity because certain people tend to get excluded from areas due to unethical behavior, whether that's redlining, usually through financing. And as you see here in the case of Minneapolis, the city of Minneapolis, I believe, was the first government which completely eliminated single-family zoning from their development code. So now I'm going to briefly go through a few examples. And I'm actually going through this lecture a little bit faster than I thought I would. I'm going to talk about first the new urbanist town of Seaside, Florida. This has been around for 40 years. This is the first new urbanist town built in the United States. New urbanism arose as a reaction against modernist planning principles that dominated, especially in the United States in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And here you can get an aerial view. This is a town that actually only reached its built out date a couple years ago. It originally had a 40-year build-out date, and I believe the last lot was built within the last year or two. And it was designed, master planned by Andres Duany, Elizabeth Plater Service firm, which is now called DPZ Co-Design. You can see the master plan here. It is based on a series of grids connecting to State Road 30A, which is the main road running to the right there, and then built around a town square. We can take a little bit closer look at it. The design focuses on the town square at the center of the plan, adjacent to State Road 30A. And then the streets radiate out northward from the square, with a lot of the local streets running parallel, perpendicular, and connecting to State Road 30A from east to west on both sides of the town. There are a few streets that run parallel to the property's edges to the north and east, but it makes use of narrow streets. It makes use of xeriscaping strategy. There is the only lawn in this development is the main square at the center, which is actually also a retention pond. So if there's a heavy rainfall, the town square actually transforms into a retention pond. But most of the time, it's just left dry. It has alleyways. It has pedestrian pathways, career what they called career pathways, because Leon Career was involved in this. But it's basically the same principle as Sitka routes here in the Middle East, in order to reduce the size of urban blocks and make walking easier for daily needs. And as you can see here, using a pedestrian shed from what is basically the post office at the center of the town square, you can see almost the entire town, except for the extreme corners to the north, lie within 800 meters. That's basically a 10-minute walk from the city square at the center. When I was at Qatar University, we actually looked at land value in Seaside over it was about 1984 to 2018. And as you might expect, of course, it's well established within real estate and urban economics and real estate analysis that value goes with floor area. And you can see here there's a very strong relationship between the total area of the lot and home in relationship to the market value. With a significant correlation. But what's also interesting is the second correlation that's happening here, which is less steep than the main correlation, and it mainly composes clustering of homes between 2,000 and 4,000 square feet. And they have a market value between $1 and $2 million. I should say that both of the examples I'm going to show you tonight are not affordable, although they're very good designs. In tracking medium sales prices between these larger lots and larger homes and smaller inland lots with similar floor areas, what we found was that there was significant fluctuations related to the 2006 housing crisis, and then the subsequent, or excuse me, the housing crisis, and then the financial crisis, and the later 2008 to 2010 Great Recession. Here you can see the size of the price peak gap between the highest value, which occurred in 2006 for the beachfront lots, and their recovery at the point in 2017, 2018. And this is the gap for the smaller inland lots. You can see that they're, even though they also suffered a drop in value in 2006, that they actually recovered their value much quicker, and the difference between the height and the recovery was very small compared to the much larger lots. So what do we argued what this means is bigger is not better, smaller is greater. Bigger lots mean more potential, and thus smaller lots mean less potential for significant disparities between sales price and actual value in the market. Basically, that means there's less opportunity for market dysfunction or a bubble effect with smaller homes. At the same time, in the United States, what's been happening over time since 1975, and you can see this graph here from the American Enterprise Institute and the US Census Bureau, as the family household size in the United States dropped from a little bit above 3 in 1970 was actually 1973 down to below 2.6 in 2015. The size of homes in the United States have been increasing in size. So what this means is by building bigger homes, by using bigger lots, you're actually building into a real estate market uh, the possibility of bubbles and quite drastic bubbles in the real estate market, whereas smaller homes and smaller lots means greater economic resilience in the housing market. There are still will be boom and bust cycles, but they're fewer and they're gentler boom and bust cycles. And when you do it in this way, profit gets measured over decades, not over annual returns recorded to Wall Street. And Seaside's a great example of that, where um, the developer of Seaside has, I don't want to go into how much money he's made, but he's made a huge amount of money because he has been invested in developing that town over 40 years. Now, here closer in our region, I want to talk just briefly about Musharraf downtown Doha, which was master planned by Allies and Morrison, and we'll look at the master plan in a moment. But one of the objectives of this project was to bring Qatari citizens back into the city center to offer them an opportunity for a type of downtown living that included townhomes, but also large apartments. And in this sense, I'm not going to present the economic data that we did on this. There's a paper based on it, but this has been very successful in drawing Qataris back to the downtown area. The number of Qataris living in Musharraf downtown Doha, if I remember correctly, is about 50% above their share of the population in the country as a whole. Musharraf was actually designed by the master plans really by Allies and Morrison, but it was also AECOM and OVE Europe. The British firms were all developed in the master plan. Physically and functionally, it's effectively composed of 4 quarters using a pinwheel axis, which you can see right here, which divides it into these quarters. And the mainline train station of the Doha Metro at Musharraf Terminal Station is located at the southwest corner. If we actually look at this in terms of the pedestrian shed, much like Seaside, you can see from the geometric center of Musharraf downtown Doha that the entire neighborhood is more or less within 800 meters of the center of the neighborhood, again, except for the extreme corners to the north and the south. And if we actually look at the pedestrian shed for the mainline station down to the southwest corner, you can actually see it mostly covers within 800 meters what is actually the southwest quarter. One of the things that we found in our study, which is also consistent with studies in other cities around the world, is that the cost per square meter of housing in this quarter is higher than in the other quarters. And that has to do with a simple premise. The closer you are to public rail, the more valuable the property is and the higher the value for it in terms of the cost per square meter. Now, what Musharraf downtown Doha really does beautifully, in my opinion, it's a great project if you get a chance to visit it, is it uses 8 principles. It basically modernizes the traditional Qatari architectural vocabulary using, for example, ornamental window screens, as you see to the left here. It uses small urban blocks and sitkas, which help to promote walkability with modern conveniences. For example, they have water fountains that are cooled year-round, so during the hot summer months, you can still walk around and refresh yourself with cool water. As I already pointed out to you, the master plan maintains a pinwheel axis, both at the macro and micro scale of the neighborhood. And in our research, we've actually found that this is kind of typical of many Islamic settlements. And finally, they actually use shared space in order to slow down either their shared space where pedestrians and bicyclists and trams can operate in the same space. As you see right here, you can actually see a child walking right by a tram line track. And they also use paving materials to slow down the traffic. You can see that in the photograph to the left. So this accommodates vehicular traffic, but vehicular traffic cannot move through this neighborhood at much more than 20 kilometers per hour because of the paving materials that are used. The other things that they do in here very nicely is they take Qatari courtyard houses have a tradition of having verandas on their courtyard. So what they've done is they've taken the traditional courtyard veranda and inverted it into shaded street arcades, much like you'll find in many South American cities, so that you have very large sidewalks which are shaded for much of the year or much of the year. Um, and then they have used the courtyard typology for many of their buildings. So mid-rise buildings actually use these courtyards to create light wells for the housing. And then windows and balconies sit deep within the building envelope to help mediate for the climate, provide shading, and also a higher degree of residential privacy. And then finally, they use consistency in materials and colors and textures throughout so that the development has a unified appearance. Um, Projects like this have inspired young Qatari architects. This is a project by Moza Abadan, who is now an architect with private engineering office. It's called High Rethinking Qatari Neighborhoods, and she was interested in developing a neighborhood prototype to actually recreate and reactivate the street life of Qatari neighborhoods. And in this, she adopts the pinwheel axis strategy, which you can see in the main streets to the right, to the left. At the center, she actually incorporates a shared space at the center of the neighborhood with the opportunities for mosque as nodes, including a local mosque and also a Friday mosque. The Friday mosque, if this neighborhood would be replicated, could actually change to a school or additional shops. She had a limited number of building typologies, mosque, farmers market, service apartments, courtyard house types, in order to keep the costs down of this. And she actually incorporated a sophisticated network. Even though this is a well-connected neighborhood, the residential homes all have their entryways off pedestrian greenway paths. And then they tend to open up onto streets out the back. She also incorporated outdoor recreational space and pathways through landscape, so it's possible to walk through different parts of the neighborhood with only having to cross the main streets, not actually use them, as you can see in the landscape. And she actually made sure that all these buildings still had majlis, and she actually incorporated community majlis as well. And she caters for parking and vehicles by using an extensive on-street parking strategy. So, and of course, the on-street parking also slows down the traffic because drivers are very good at recognizing potential hazards, so they would slow down, as you can see here. With these building typologies, she also developed a series of courtyard typologies, including a courtyard house that's only 10 meters wide. What she effectively did is the traditional Qatari courtyard houses tend to be very large building footprints with four sides to the courtyard. What she did is she actually incorporated the South American three-sided courtyard with common walls between. And then these common walls could actually be penetrated to make a larger home, which you can see here. So with that, I have to say I went through that much faster than I was expecting. But there's lots of references associated with this, and I'm happy to answer any questions. There's lots of background behind this. Here you can see another view of Masharif of downtown Doha. We went through the idea of housing as a fundamental building in cities, housing the world's sustainability and the challenges, and the idea of dense, smaller neighborhoods. My contact details here, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Okay. Any questions at all? You're all probably grateful. It's Thursday night. You all want to go home anyway, right? It was short. Looks like Anamika's typing a question. Do such spaces get gentrified? And Amika, I guess I have to ask you, oh, can I ask you what you mean by such spaces? Oh, do they work as gated communities? No. You mean you're talking about the one with the last housing project with Moza Abadan? No, they are actually designed to be connected together. Her project was actually designed with the idea that if one neighborhood was built, then you could replicate the next neighborhood over, and then the next neighborhood over, and then they would all link together with each other. So they wouldn't work as communicated communities. They would actually be linked together. And she used the spatial layout to just naturally isolate the homes within the layout, so you don't actually need to use a gated compound. Yeah, Dr. Ream, it is unfortunate you're muted. I don't know if I can change it. I don't know. I don't know where the controls are. Let me see if I can. Yeah, I can't find how to unmute these. Um, The other examples, Sheriff Downtown Doha, again, that's completely connected out. It's not gated, it's connected out. And Seaside, of course, is not gated either. It's completely it was the first Seaside, Florida was the first development in that region, and there's a whole series of housing developments following its model that have grown up around it and connected to it. Okay. Any other questions? If not, I can end it and we can bring it to a close. Okay, well, thank you very much. I hope you found it interesting. I actually went through it a little bit quicker than I thought it was. I actually cut out some stuff because I was worried I was going to go over. But I hope you enjoyed the talk. And at least with my colleagues, you can always ask me your questions when you see me next. Thank you. You're welcome. Thank you.